In this video, I'm going to give you a quick introduction to a couple tools that can be especially useful when you're designing parts that might be injection molded in plastic. So the first one we're going to look at is the shell tool, and really this is useful anytime you're trying to create a hollow part. So to start with, let's pretend we're creating a plastic box. So I'll just start with this center rectangle. Fully define my sketch. Let's say I'm going to make a 4" by 6" box. And let's say it's an 1.5 inches deep that I'm going to make. So I'll just extrude it out 1.5 inches. So now I've got a big block, but I wanted to make a box, not just a block. So I need to hollow this out. And before I do that, let's say I don't want it to have these hard edges. I really want it to be rounded corners on the corners and on the bottom. So I can do that with the fillet tool. And let's say I wanted them to be 3/8 of an inch fillet, so 0.375. And there's a couple different ways. I can go around and select each edge that I want to fillet, and you can see it previews it. Or if there's an area where I want to do the whole face, or all the edges along the face, I can just click the face and it does all of them. So that's fine. And then I said I wanted to do the corners too. And you can see when I do that in the preview, it's smart enough to figure out how to join those fillets at the corners. So I'll go ahead and add all my corners. And then right click to say OK. And there's the outer shape of my box. So the fillet tool is great to use. I'm glad we have this as an example of what it does. But one of the reasons I wanted to use it specifically now is think about if I wanted to hollow out this part. Before I did the fillet, when it was like this, it wouldn't be that hard to hollow out this box. I could sketch on this face. I could select the face and convert the entities. That gives me the outer perimeter of it. I could turn all of those to construction, which means like center lines. And then I could offset from those. So pick this whole chain and offset either in or out. Let's say reverse. Let's say I want to have 1/4 inch walls. Oops, I did it the wrong direction, so I'll do that again. So it's Control Z. Okay, select them all. Offset entities, 1/4 inch, reverse direction. Okay, there we go. So there I've got the sketch, and then I could do an extruded cut. And since I want to have it a consistent distance, the type of extrusion, I could either figure out the math to subtract 1/4 inch from 1.5, and I could put in a depth of 1.25. That would be one way that would leave a 1/4 inch bottom. But the way that would be smarter to do it would be to do offset from surface, and then pick the surface that I want it to offset from. So I could say this is the surface here that I want to offset from. So pick that surface and then say I want it to be 0.25 inches off it. Oops, so I must have done my definition wrong. Let's look at that again, see what I did. Oh, I went back to blind, sorry. Offset from surface. That's so the direction, and then the face that I'm coming off of is that face, offset. And you can see I've got a box now. And the reason it was good to use that offset from surface rather than doing the math for 1.25 inches. Let's say I come back and change this to say I made my box 2.5 inches. And you can see that the depth stayed correct because it was always a depth of 1/4 inch off the surface. Okay, so that would have been one way to hollow it out, right? But that would be a lot harder to do if I had all these fillets in here, right? When I do it now, it's going to kind of mess things up on the inside, and I don't have consistent thickness across the bottom now. If I look at a section view through it, you can see there that at those corners, it's not an even 1/4 inch wall thickness. So Solidworks gives us a great tool. Let me go ahead and get rid of that example where I was showing you how you could hollow it out using a normal extruded cut. It has this great tool called Shell. So if you look up here under your features, you'll see Shell. all I have to do is click the face that I want to be open, basically where the opening in the part's going to be, and then how thick I want the walls, so 1/4 inch. And it does all the complicated geometry to give me nice even walls. So you can look at my fillets on the outside are replicated on the inside such to keep my wall thickness of 1/4 inch. So again, if I look at my section view and drag that through it, you can see now I have even wall thickness of 1/4 inch. So that's the shell tool. Super handy if you have complicated geometry that you just want to hollow out. This rectangular box is a decent example, but think if you had some spherical shape that you wanted to hollow out with an even wall thickness. This is a great way to do that using shell. Okay, one other thing I want to talk about is draft. So you'll see up here again we have another tool called draft, and draft is a tool that's useful when you're creating things that are injection molded. Draft is a way that adds a gentle taper to the walls of parts so that they release from the mold easier in a injection mold application. So to do that, there's a couple different ways you can do that. I'm going to get rid of all my parts here up to, let's just get rid of the fillet, roll this back and delete these two. Okay, so let's go back and look at the definition of this feature. One of the things that we haven't paid attention to yet is this thing here that talks about draft. And so if we click on draft, I'm going to exaggerate it. So I'm going to say like 5 degrees draft. And let's see what happens when I do that. You'll see that there's now a taper to the walls, and that makes it release easier from a mold. So 5 degrees taper is a lot. Typically you just have a degree or so of taper. So by putting in, let's just say 1 degree taper, without me having to do the math to say how much taper that or how much it should come in over the length of the box, which you could do. We're going to get to the loft feature later. That's where you can connect 2 different sketches as an extrusion. So I could have had one sketch that had this size rectangle of 4 by 6 on the bottom, and then a different rectangle at the other end that is, you can see this is 3.913 inches by something less than 6 by 5.913 inches. That's what the amount of taper ended up being at 1 degree over 1.5 inches. And you could do the same thing on an extruded cut. Let's say I sketch on the face of this, just like I was showing before, convert the entities, turn those to for construction, and then offset, go in the inside direction. I can reverse that. So now here, if I do an extruded cut, you'll see I can have draft here as well. So once again, if I say 1 degree draft, and look at the wall of my part. Oops, I forgot to define how I was saying the depth there. So that was just a blind, and what we really wanted was to do an offset from surface of 1/4 inch. Let's do that again. Okay, so there's my part. Again, let's look at a section view through it. And you can see that the walls taper on the cut as well. And that will just make it release from the mold easily. Okay, that's an overview of draft. So I'll get rid of my section view. The last thing I want to talk about is the ribs tool. You'll see these are all kind of in a row up here. So ribs adds in a reinforcement, and it does it in a more easy fashion than if you actually went in and modeled it individually. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to decide how I'm going to stop my rib. So there's a couple different ways I can create ribs, and at the same time right now I'm going to show you how we can create a plane. So we have our standard front, top, and right planes here. Sometimes it's useful to have a plane to sketch on that doesn't lie on a face, isn't one of our standard planes. So you can do that up here under reference geometry. You can see you can create different types of geometry. And I'm going to say a plane, and I want to create a plane that goes diagonal from one corner to the other here. So to do that, I'm going to pick this line right here, and then I'm going to create pick another reference here. That's this line. And then I'm going to say, instead of perpendicular, I want that to be coincident with both of them. And when I do that, it should create, okay, it doesn't like something, so maybe it didn't like that I created two edges. Let's see if it'll go through a point. There we go. So one line and a point was what it wanted to define this plane. So I'll go ahead and create that plane, and you can see it made it the shape of the part, but I can drag out the edges a little if it helps me keep clear what I'm looking at. So now I have this plane that runs through the corners of the box. And let's create another one now that goes the other direction. And so again, I'll just pick a line and then a point. And you can see it created another plane for me. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch on these planes where I want a rib. So I'm going to say I want a rib that kind of braces down. Maybe rather than having this thick 1/4 inch wall, I want to actually have it be a pretty thin wall. Let's say maybe it's 0.075 inches or something, really thin wall. So to keep those walls from buckling, I'm going to brace it in the corners, let's say. So what I'm going to do is select one of the planes that I created. I'm going to create a sketch on it and go normal to it. And I'm going to change my view type to be line. Oh, that's weird. Let's try that again. Not sure why that blacked out when I go to all lines. So we'll leave it there. So you can see now, you can see the draft here. This is what would make it a little complicated to do my geometry otherwise. But I can select that inner wall there. And again, I'm going to convert that entity to bring it into my sketch. And I can also sketch the bottom line. Come back again. Okay. And put one down here. And then I'm going to change this one to be construction geometry. So that means it's not actually used in the sketch to create anything. I'm just going to draw a rib that comes down to the bottom. I'm sorry, not a rib, a line. Okay. And so that's my line. Then if I come back over to features, I can click on rib. So let's go back and turn to shaded view so things look normal again. So now you can see that line that I've created there. Let's say I want that to be my rib, right? I'm going from that line down into the corner. So I'll say create a rib, and I can say how thick it is. Let's say I want it to be an 1/8 inch thick. And you can see here which direction it's going, and see the arrow. The arrow looks like it's going the direction I want it to. So I'll just say make that rib, and you can see it added in a rib that went right up to the bottom and right up to the sides there. So that's one way I can create the rib if I want something diagonal like that. So why would I do it this way instead of just creating a full closed sketch or whatnot? All I had to do was draw one line, and then it did the math to figure out, even though these different sides are tapered and whatnot, it just came right up to the surfaces without me having to figure out the math for that. So that's one way that ribs are really nice. And also that way they're following the geometry again. Say if I changed my draft on my cut here, let's say instead of 1 degree, I made it 3 degrees, my rib still lines up just perfectly with the inside, whereas if instead of drawing the line and using rib, I had drawn a sketch of the side of this rib, it wouldn't necessarily line up correctly anymore. Hopefully that makes sense there. Okay, so that's one way to use rib. I'm going to hide my planes that I used before. So if I just right click and click on hide, the little eyeball, you'll see they disappear from my graphic space, but I can still get to them over here if I need to in the feature tree. So I'm going to create one more plane, and this one I'm going to just select the bottom plane and do an offset from it. So I'm going to say an offset of 1 inch, and let's make sure it's going the direction I want. It is. Okay, so now I have a plane that's offset 1 inch from the bottom of the box. So I'm going to select that plane and sketch on it. And here, this would be a different way to create ribs that were of even height. So now let's just say I want to draw a line from one corner to the other corner. And I'm going to actually suppress this rib, or I can't do that while I'm in the sketch. Let's get out of the sketch. And we're going to suppress this rib so it's not showing up. And so there's a difference between hiding. Watch, if I hide it, you can't see the rib anymore. It actually hid the whole part since it's integral to the part. So what I really want to do is suppress that feature. And that just basically makes it not affect the geometry anymore. Then I'm going to come back to my sketch here and add in another line going from the other diagonal. Okay, so I have two lines. One's not fully defined, so I must not have quite, that end's fully defined. This end must not be quite. There we go. Okay, so my sketch is fully defined. I can see that down here. All the lines are black. Now I'm going to go to features again and do my rib again. And you can see it already said, oh, we've got these two lines. That must be what you want to go to. And it's just going to extrude down to until it runs into another surface. And so you can see it added those X ribs across the bottom. Okay, that's an overview introduction to draft, to shell, and to ribs. Tools that are useful when you're working. The rib and shell can be useful in just about any type of material. Draft is, like I said, typically used when we're working with injection molded parts. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Stay tuned for our next video.